Oh, hello there. Yes, I just wanted to sort of talk you through this brief clip with Alistair Stewart on the inevitable GBN. I think it's sort of indicative of the kind of incredibly limited choices that we're given, and is probably very, very indicative again of an establishment mindset, whereby you are given what look like choices, which in fact are no choices at all, and it completely ignores the fundamental problems with late period capitalism, as some of us might call it. Let's see what he has to say.
I studied economics at Bristol University and politics, the twin forces to much of what we do and the quality of life that we enjoy. I began work in the late 1970s when Labour were as left could be under Michael Foot, and the Conservatives had rejected.
Okay, yes, there's a sort of common misunderstanding about the Labour Party in the 1970s. They would be, by European standards of the day, would be considered a social democratic party. They were to the left of British politics, granted, but they weren't as left could be. They were basically continuing that post-war consensus, which effectively was starting to break down in the late 1970s when Michael Foot was around. Actually, it was the early 80s. I think he's got that slightly wrong. Let's move on.
The Heathite mantras of intervention and big state economics in favour of the tough free market approach of Margaret Thatcher. On the economy, there were big clashes between the Keynesians, who were all for intervention, government money could solve everything, and the monetarists, who saw inflation as the key evil that could only be controlled by controlling the money supply. It made for a decade of brutal change and was...
Yes, it did, didn't it? Across the planet. Those of you who have any knowledge of history will understand that the wonderful non-Keynesian economists, the monetarists, chewed Chile apart as a social experiment, just to see what might happen. And what happened was something bad, which the Chileans are still living with today. Thatcher and Reagan were bought into the idea that if you can just magically get rid of inflation in the economy, then everything will be hunky-dory. Well, the way you do that is by effectively, in the early 80s, those of us like Alistair that lived through it, you destroy people's lives in the process. But hey, let's move on.
Followed by the return of intervention under Blair, and to a lesser extent under Cameron.
Right, okay, yes. The intervention under Blair. The Blair government realistically spent very little more than the Thatcher government in terms of intervention into the economy. I don't think you can call David Cameron an interventionist. If you look at the appalling results from the last 10 years of austerity, which was Cameron, right, okay, it was merely continuing the same old. Yes, I mean, there have been arguments about Blair and getting his knighthood and everything, but what's Blair's legacy been? Blair's legacy has only been the Iraq War. Everything else got blown away, and even if you look at Labour's record in those days, it wasn't exactly like they were doing anything different from Margaret Thatcher. I mean, she considered Blair to be her kind of spiritual heir. There was no change. And there still isn't any change now, but let's come on to that one.
The challenges that we face this year are curiously reminiscent of those times. Inflation on the up again, energy crises wherever you look, and the public finances in a mess.
Right, and there's the indicative thing. The challenges we face now are curiously reminiscent of those times. What? The 1970s, the 1980s, and the early 2000s and the 2010s. Right, so curiously, we're still in the same spot after 40 years. Yes, Alistair. Now, if you did, I'm sure you did do maybe PPE or whatever it was at university, but the version that you would have been taught would have been the same old standard economic mantra, which is effectively that there is no alternative to running a capitalist state, and you have to live with it. And some people are going to win, and they're called the rich people, and some people are going to lose, and they're called the poor people. And it's only about arguing about the crumbs. Let's move on.
But the political class seemed to me to be in a state of confusion. Johnson's a pragmatist, wrestling with the third year of an albeit declining pandemic. His own side say that he's too keen to throw everything the Treasury has and more that it doesn't yet have, at any problem that presents itself. Starmer is seeking to cast himself more in the light of Blair, all things to all men and women, and shed even the memories of Corbyn, who was much more like Foot on the left. This year, we're going to see their true colours, as we wrestle with rising...
Yes, we will, won't we? So we've got a Conservative government that's going to spend a lot of money, tax you heavily, doesn't really care about it, or we've got a right-of-centre Labour Party that are going to do the same thing. Yeah, because this is what modern social democracy gets you. It gets you two technocratic parties with almost no difference between them whatsoever that will simply continue doing exactly the same thing with the same failed economic model.
Prices, labour shortages, high interest rates and that global energy crisis, what will they do? Will Johnson rediscover traditional Tory economics and get tough at the first opportunity, or will he cling to intervention and bail out as the election approaches? And if he's still there, will the Tories think it's time for another leader, someone perhaps like Liz Truss, who's more in the Thatcher camp than Johnson? For Labour, it seems a little bit clearer. While Starmer is no Corbyn, his shadow chancellor, Rachel Reeves, is a bailout, windfall tax levying benefit booster when it comes to the cost of living. She's in the papers this morning talking about it, and she's been on telly too. History suggests that the traditional Tory prescription lasts a bit longer, but at a price. Labour's...
Yes. So, you can get a reasonably functioning economy, but at a price. What's the price? People's lives, people's livelihood. And again, just not addressing the basic problem. Yeah, it's a deck chairs on the Titanic approach to the impending disaster of an iceberg, which is a climate change metaphor, I think. Anyway, let's finish off.
Prescription appeals to the voters, but carries long-term costs to all of us as well. The choice will be yours, and perhaps before too long. Finally, two thoughts, and I was delighted to hear Justin touch on one of them. Economics goes in cycles. Dark before dawn, recession before recovery. What goes around comes around. It will get better, but in its own sweet time. Secondly, confidence and optimism are crucial. If you think things can only get worse, they probably will. So, patience, self-belief, and a government that you can trust to do the right thing all matter.
No, they don't, Alistair, do they? OK, patience. One of my favourite quotes of all time, I don't know quite who said it, was civilization is built on the patience of the poor. People are running out of patience. OK, we have had 40 years of this neoliberal regime thrust upon us. The economics don't work. You can say, oh, it goes in cycles. What that means is it doesn't work. People that shout and scream from the rooftops about how wonderful capitalism is also have to accept that, roughly speaking, every 10 years or so it goes down the pan and completely and utterly disrupts and or destroys people's lives. It's a system that only works for a tiny percentage of the population, and that percentage is getting smaller. I don't want to be patient. I'm 58, right? I don't want to have faith anymore. Faith in what? Faith in Keir Starmer delivering a slightly less bad version of an economic system that exploits and destroys people's lives. No thank you, Alistair. Can we have option C, please?